Good morning. We have a lot of homework to do today. This much homework to find out if the forests and recreational areas of British Columbia are going to be properly handled by whichever government is in power to make sure we don't run out of trees, run out of money, and run out of potential prosperity. This is a tiny little book called the Forest and Range Resource Analysis Technical Report. Reduced to 2 simple slides, the report shows this. See that? Yeah. And there's another one. That tells the whole blinking story. It means nothing to you and it means nothing to me. So here to give us a lucid, succinct explanation and analysis of what's going to happen in the long-term handling of British Columbia forests is Tom Waterland, the Minister of Forests. And we're going to do our best to keep it simple for me, if not for you. Heavy day today. We're on resources as well. Do you remember all the kerfuffle about the Northern Tier pipeline? Remember, no Canadian route, just the all-American route down on the West Coast across the northern U.S. states, thereby putting Trudeau's and Clark's noses out of joints? The Northern Tier propagandists were in town the other day, and one of them said to me as I asked him, "You don't care what we think up here about your Northern Tier operation, do you? Economic jealousy will raise its ugly head at once, and Trudeau and Clark might go into little pouts and make nasty phone calls to Carter. But I mean, what the hell do you care in Northern Tier pipeline about what we think about it?"
We care because in the Northern Tier pipeline system, both the oil transshipment port and the project is going to be in existence for an awful long time. We are going to be built, it's going to go ahead. We're going to have to live in those waters and in that part of the country for an awful long time, so we do care.
That's a U.S. spokesman for Northern Tier Pipeline, to whom I shall be speaking later in the program. But first, what's going to happen to our forests? What would have happened to our forests if we'd kept on going the way we were going? That'll be from Tom Waterland after the break.
Bone of British Columbia's economy, but not everyone has always done everything possible.
Tom Waterland is the Minister of Lands and Forests. Mr. Waterland, I had this home over the weekend. I read the tiny, thin summary instead. Now, first of all, I think you should tell us how the government has given birth to this and why. Did this start way back with the Pierce report?
Yes, Jack. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on reading even the summary, and I hope everyone in British Columbia eventually reads the summary. I don't expect too many people to read the technical report. But it did begin back with the Pierce Royal Commission report, which led to a Forest Policy Advisory Committee under my jurisdiction, which developed plans and really new forest legislation in British Columbia for the first time since 1912. That forest legislation made a legislative requirement of doing a regular assessment of the state of the forest and range resource in British Columbia. The first one was due this September to be presented to Lieutenant Governor and Council, and it was required by that legislation that it be presented to the legislature no later than last Friday, which was done, and we have it before us now.
As I read the summary, and with my own kind of superficial knowledge of logging in British Columbia, most of which I've heard about from politicians, in the 50s and the 60s, we were totally convinced that we could cut with unbridled optimism forever, cut and get out, and that we would always have enough timber from our logs to keep us prosperity. That was not correct, was it? And is that what this report shows?
Jack, the forests of British Columbia have been used consciously by successive governments over the last, all of this century really, as an economic development tool for our province, and has worked very, very well indeed. We're now coming to the point when a transition is taking place between the time of harvesting that old growth timber into managing second growth forests. It's always been known that that transition would come. It's beginning now, and we are presenting this program. We'll be implementing this program to make sure that that transition maintains the place our forest industry has in our economy and in our social life in BC.
But to keep it simple for me, if we had kept cutting, just going through and with our kind of silviculture, reforestation not being that good, how much of future income would we have lost?
If we had continued harvesting and managing our forests at the same level, we would have been looking at approximate 1/3 reduction in our allowable cut. That reduction will not occur as long as we implement the plan you have before you.
1/3. In other words, we'd have lost 1/3 of future revenue.
Yes, our current allowable cut in British Columbia is about 75 million cubic meters a year. Without this management program, that would have been reduced in a period of about 30, 40, or 50 years to approximately 50 million.
Mind you, it's fairly obvious. If it takes a Douglas fir 80 years to grow, it's 80 years before we have the same Douglas fir to reharvest, and we can't wait that long.
Well, those Douglas fir that we have been harvesting have taken 500 years to grow, Jack.
Yeah, but 80 is the minimum, is it not, for
No,
Douglas fir?
We're looking perhaps on some of our high site lands to being able to harvest Douglas fir within 50 years if we use management programs we have laid out here, if we use superior seed stock, and continue to manage the forest throughout the entire growing cycle. We can harvest Douglas fir, good sawlog material, within 50 years.
Now, a semi-political question, even with the best will in the world. Oh, by the way, is this reasonably non-partisan, this whole operation? Look, after all, Pierce was appointed by the NDP government to do it, and you've picked up some of his... No, I'm being quite honest. Is this reasonably non-partisan, do you think?
Mr. Webster, forest management, resource management is not a subject for political differences. This material is technical information. It was developed really over 2 successive governments, and the program as worked out by the professionals within the Ministry of Forests was accepted completely intact by the government, and we're funding that program.
Politically again, though, does it indicate that with the best will in the world, the tree farm license system, with its allowable cut largely in the hands, I would say, of the big companies, was headed towards disaster?
No, I must disagree with you, Jack.
I'm only asking. I'm not stating a position.
All right, we have a number of tenure systems in British Columbia, one of which is the tree farm license system. And quite frankly, the tree farm license tenure has given us the best level of forest management we have had. Other systems are the timber sale harvesting license, the timber sale license, all of which are simply the right to cut timber without a site-specific type of tenure. But the tree farm licenses have given us the best examples of good forest management we have in this province.
Now, you talk greatly in the summary and in the big book about silviculture. To me, does that mean reforestation, and does it indicate that our reforestation program in the past was at best half-hearted by the companies and by the government?
Jack, reforestation is one part of the whole silvicultural process. Silviculture is to forestry as agriculture is to farming. It's the total management of the crop, from harvesting, planting the next crop, and tending that crop through to its maturity.
But I've heard many a complaint, not only from truck loggers, but from bigger people too, that our reforestation program was not good, and that the big boys were dragging their heels on it, or using different techniques, and that you weren't all that sharp on the government side. Was that not a valid complaint in the past?
The theory and the practice of sustained yield was first presented by Sloan in 1945 Royal Commission report. It was again stated in the report he did 10 years later. In 1965, a target was established by the then government. Mr. Williston was the Minister of Lands, Forests and Water Resources at the time. The target was established to be producing 75 million seedlings by 1975. You remember that. Mm-hmm. That target has been reached in effect. A couple of years ago, we planted over 70 million seedlings. It dropped off a bit last year because of problems we had with frost heaves in our nurseries. Last year, I believe we planted something in the order of 65 million. Under this program, we will be planting a minimum of 117 million seedlings a year by the year 1985, and probably much before then.
All done by the government?
No.
I mean, you brought out this $1.4 billion program in the budget, did you not?
We are trying to include the private sector as much as possible in everything that happens in the forest. We will level our seedling production at about 100 million seedlings a year. Increases will come by industrial and commercial nurseries in the private sector, which in effect will be paid for by offsets to stumpage payment. The only value...
You lost me there. The big boys will be allowed a cut on the stumpage to encourage them to do the silviculture.
The production, they always have, Jack. The production of seedlings, the management of the forest has been a cost allowed in the stumpage appraisal system. After all, the people of the province own the forest land. It's the people's and the province's responsibility to maintain it. The only value that forest land has as far as timber production is concerned is in the products we sell in the marketplace. And out of that value comes the cost of managing the forest.
I get the impression from here that utilization, lack of full utilization, has been targeted in here and is of great concern in this report.
Yeah, we have, Jack, over, well, as long as I've been aware of forestry in British Columbia, have been gradually tightening down on utilization standards required. Right now in the interior, we use up to down to a 4-inch top. We can use more than that. We can use that smaller wood to make chips for our pulp mills. And this is happening right now. You're probably aware of the pulpwood agreement hearings I had in Williams Lake a short time ago. And the results of that is that we gave the industry up there a gigantic dose of free enterprise and said, look, the fiber is there, you pay the right price for it and you can get it out. And if you can get it out, we're going to make some special considerations on stumps so that we don't discourage the extraction of that wood.
Yeah, that utilization being that when you go into a place to cut it, clear cut it or whatever, you use all the wood you can.
That's absolutely
You don't
right.
leave the garbage lying around on the ground.
There'll always be some debris that you can't use, Jack. You can't at this moment use the needles and some of the twigs, but I was criticized a couple of years ago by a speech I made it to the Council of Forest Industries, and one of the guys said, Waterland's going to have us out there with a whisk broom and a brush sweeping up the floor of the forest. In effect, that's the ultimate objective.
Webster and Waterland after the break. Let me see, Mr. Waterland, if I get the message correctly. This fantastic, expensive, detailed report has taken how long to do? 5 years?
Well, actually, the report itself, we began working on it immediately the legislation was passed which required it, which is 1978.
And it says that unless we alter our silviculture and our harvesting radically in many ways, the revenue from lumber will drop by 33 1/3% if we kept going the way we're going now. Is that right?
That's correct, Jack. Unless
Okay.
we manage it properly, there'll be a reduction in cut.
Please, Mr. Waterland, look at this thing on the monitor and tell me, the increased harvest target on the top line, what does that mean?
All right, Jack, the first part of our program assessment of the resources, we had to look at what are the markets for the products we have to sell. The markets are good. We, in effect, can sell everything we can produce, and that upper line indicates what the cut would have to be in order to meet market demands or markets that are available to us. What it indicates is that if we increase the cut, this fall down in or reduction in available cut will come at a much earlier date and will be much deeper.
In other words, if we come right down the pike there to that low bit,
Yeah.
that's what we'd be left with to sell if we increase the cutting
If
rate.
we increase the cut, and then that line, as you see, comes up to what we call the long-range sustainable yield, and that is the yield that would be available from a wild, unmanaged forest. Now your next line, I guess it's a green one there, Jack, is projecting the present rate of harvest. And that, as you see, that reduction in cut, which comes as you make that transition to the second growth forest, doesn't come until a later period of time. When it does come, it's not as severe, and the cut again then recovers to the long-range sustainable yield.
In other words,
I must emphasize, Jack, that this is what happens if we don't implement this program.
Okay, that's the one that says if we don't implement the program, even on 2 different levels, down the tube and back up to a lesser level.
That's right.
Next slide.
Now this slide...
Possible results of long-term commitments, improved forest management and use. Present harvest is that top line.
Yes. What it indicates, Jack, is that the 3 sections, the lower green part there, are gains in growth over and above what we can have from wild forest if we do this intensive management, intensive silvicultural work. The second part, the yellow part, are gains that we can make by better utilization, both in the extraction from the forest and the manufacturing processes. And the top red section is the gains in wood availability to us that will be made by increasing our protection efforts in the province.
So therefore, on the long-range basis, even with our protection efforts, our present harvest will drop some.
This is the best estimation we have now, Jack, and we all admit in the ministry, the professional foresters, that we have a great deal to learn about how the forest will respond to these applications of management techniques. It's very possible that that line could be higher than it is. We think this is a minimum level to which we'll recover. It'll be something above that. We're being as objective and reasonable as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. It is a crisis.
No, it's not a crisis at all, Jack.
Look, I was going to ask you, how many years? If we'd kept cutting, how many years before we lost 33% of our lumber for export or use domestically? 5 years, 10 years?
What you're asking me, I guess, Jack, is what happened to sustained yield?
Right.
Okay, let me explain what sustained yield is. When Mr. Sloan, Justice Sloan, put forth his report, he said we must practice sustained yield. And by doing that, he said, we have to plan the harvest of this old growth timber crop so that when it is gone, we will have a second growth crop coming along, knowing full well that as you make that transition, just the dynamics of tree growth, you know that the second growth crop will not have as much wood per acre as that old growth crop did.
Because it's thinner.
It's thinner and it's younger. It hasn't taken as long to grow. But that reduction will come. It's a fact of life, and everybody has recognized that in the forest industry, the professionals for years. What we're saying now, in addition to what Sloan said, yes, but we can, through applying these sophisticated management techniques, we can increase the rate of growth of that second growth forest. We can increase the size of the wood, the availability of it to us, so that we can almost come back, and perhaps we can come back to the same density per acre of land that we had in the old growth forest.
Put it in my simpler language, sustained yield served a purpose, but the final technical studies show that the present the sustained yield system wouldn't have worked so well in the future.
Actually, we are continuing the sustained yield process, Jack, but we're moving from the old growth forest to the new forest.
Does it mean that the government takes more of a direct management of all of the forests in British Columbia and leaves less to the, and I'm not knocking the big boys, but does it mean more bureaucratic interference with the people who cut the trees?
No, actually, Jack, what we want to do as we implement these programs is make sure that more and more of the work is carried out by the private sector. I don't want to have a monstrous increase in the staff of the Forest Service.
Should hope not.
We want to provide opportunities for the private sector in planting, in stand tending work, in fertilization, all these things we do in the forest, and that's the direction we're going in. We'll be having the private sector in seedling production, which has never happened in the past. We'll have to maintain
Did you always supply the
quality.
seedlings before?
We always have, yes. There's some private land which industry has grown their own seedlings for, but all Crown land reforestation has been done by the government.
One thing that just intrigues me, generally speaking, I mean, we've all carried shots of people planting trees and dropping them from helicopters and doing this and that and the next thing. But whatever became of natural regeneration they used to talk about with the patch logging, whatever they call that? Is natural regeneration down the tube?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, Jack, every forest jurisdiction in the world relies upon natural regeneration for a big part of their replanting or restocking of the land. In Finland and Sweden, for example, countries which everyone says are the most advanced forest practices of anywhere in the world, Finland, I think, plants something in the order of 45% of their land by planting. The rest is natural regeneration. Sweden, I believe it's in the order of 60%.
What will ours be?
Ours will be 55% to 60% of the clear-cut land areas by the time this program is implemented. I don't know how much, I don't think it should go much beyond that. Some of the problems we have, Jack, in natural regeneration is overstocking rather than not enough stocking. Some of our lodgepole pine stands in the interior, we have up to 100,000 stems per hectare growing, and the best wood is produced if you have about 1,200.
So you've got to go through and juvenile space them?
We have to go in and thin it out and give them room to
See, I read
grow.
your report.
You
Juvenile spacing.
You sure did.
You go through when they're young and you pull them out again.
Spoken like a professional, Jack.
No. I just pick up bits and pieces. This does not affect, therefore, does this affect present tenures as far as tree farm license holders are concerned? Does it make it any better for what we used to call public working circles, which are now what?
Yeah, we call them timber supply areas now, Jack. This program didn't materialize in isolation. It's a part of the whole process that started with the development of our legislation. Our new forest tenures, the forest license tenure system, puts the responsibility for re-establishing a crop of trees on the licensee. The cost of it is offset in his stumpage because it's our land, but he has the responsibility to make sure that that regeneration takes place.
But what about the public working circles, or what do you call
Well,
them?
they're called timber supply areas now. This is where most of the...
You're going to replant the timber supply areas.
Yeah, the Crown land, the land which is owned by the people, we won't plant. We make sure that it is planted. The licensee is responsible for doing it.
You mean even the guy who goes in on a bid to cut in a timber supply area will have to go back in and replant?
If he has a forest license, he will be responsible for seeing that it's regenerated. He can do that himself. He can do it by contract, but it must be done.
You'll supply the seedlings and the cost will be offset against the stumpage.
If the area has to be planted, we will either provide the seedlings or pay him for growing them.
Do you think we're getting the message across, or do you think we're boring people to death?
I don't know, Jack. Forestry is pretty important to the people in British Columbia.
I'm not
I
knocking
hope-
the scheme. I'm just saying
no.
it's difficult to.
Yeah, I hope that we can get a lot more attention. I hope everybody in British Columbia reads that little summary because it
The wee
lays it out.
summary.
Yes.
This wee thing
And
here.
that will arouse the interest, and I'm sure they'll then want to read further.
I'm going to give you a first shot as a voiceover commentator on television after the break. Do I get the message from your reports now that we will have harvested all the first growth timber in 5 years?
No, not at all, Jack. If you look at the little summary on page 5 there, it tells us that by region, and we have broken the province down into 8 regions, that this reduction in timber supply will occur at some point in the future. And this future point, if we don't do this management program, begins in the Kamloops region in 30 years' time, in the Bulkley Northwest in 40 years, in the Caribou and Peace River country, it doesn't begin for beyond 100 years. So that is when our old growth forest will be gone by region. Or not completely gone, but the harvestable part of it. So we have enough lead time by developing this information, we have enough lead time to be able to overcome those problems by applying the silvicultural practices that are available to us. Now, if you break that down farther into timber supply areas, it indicates that in some timber supply areas within these regions, a fall down will begin earlier if the industry doesn't adapt to tighter utilization standards.
It says here in Vancouver it could begin, that's the lessening of the revenue from lumber cut, in 10 years.
No. That says that there are timber supply areas within the Vancouver region that will have tightening timber supplies in 10 years unless they learn how to use more of the forest. Ocean Falls area is a good example of that. Use more of that forest there, which is not now in the allowable cut, and
Right.
that problem won't materialize at all. We can actually increase the cut.
And why are we not using Ocean Falls?
Well, because we have taken the wood out of the inventory because at this present moment in time, in the present systems of harvesting it and manufacturing it, it's not possible to do so. It's not economic wood. But this experiment
Oh, I
we're doing
see.
up there is to find a way of developing a system whereby you can get the value from that wood and thereby increase the cut, because that wood is not in our inventory right now. We have said it's not commercial wood.
But once it's commercial under these new techniques, then it would help to reinforce what's
That's
left
right.
in the Vancouver region.
When that demonstration at Ocean Falls is proved to be successful, we'll get a tremendous increase in cut on the coast because now we've learned to use it. Just as exactly the same thing that happened in the interior when we superimposed a pulp industry over top of a sawmill industry.
Yeah, we see Peace River won't fall down, as you say, for 100 years or more. But of course, we don't get anything like a big percentage of our supply from Peace River that we get from, say, the Rupert or the Vancouver area, do we?
55% of the total forest harvest in the province is east of the Cascade Mountains.
East of the Cascades.
It's the interior parts of the
That's
province.
the far side of the
No,
province.
it's starting up Fraser Canyon, the interior part of the province. You know, Merritt, all the mica
Yes, yes, yes,
constituency,
yes.
Kamloops,
Silly
and
of
so
me.
on.
55% of the harvestable timber is still east of the Cascades.
That's right. That tremendous expansion that took place in the forest industry during the 60s, you know, it's outpaced the coastal industry now. Not well-known fact in British
No,
Columbia.
it's not a well-known fact in British Columbia. Okay, Tom Waterland, Minister of Lands and Forests, you brought a little film with you, which goes to the silviculture aspect of it. Is that correct?
The total forest management aspects of it, Jack, yes. Silviculture, we call it. This shot here, I think, Jack, is showing some of the nurseries that we have in British Columbia. These are seedlings out in the field. Here's our seedlings in a greenhouse. We're going to be increasing our expenditure from about $47 million this last year to over $60 million by 1985.
Stop for a minute. I thought that was Mac and Blow building lying on its back. It's seedlings in a nursery.
Seedlings in a government nursery, yes. We'll be planting $100 million under our basic program, another $17 million under our intensive program.
We're still going straight for Douglas fir all the way and replanting.
No, we're planting every species of trees that grows in British Columbia practically, Jack. We generally go back to the native species that is growing in an area. They survive the best.
Right.
If we harvest lodgepole pine, we generally plant it. If we harvest spruce, we plant spruce, in most cases.
Not a bad cut, small tree. That was an alder.
Yes, what we're doing here, Jack, is preparing old sites for replanting. This looks like an area of blowdown where Mother Nature has come in with a windstorm and created a mess, and we're cleaning it up, preparing it for planting, getting rid of some of these snags that are
Hey,
lying
listen,
around.
is it right that trees sometimes regenerate only if it's burned over?
Burning of a site is a very important aspect of preparing a site for planting. You get control of the weeds that come in to hamper your seedlings, and you can control the type of trees you get back. You can plant a better quality of tree if you burn up and prevent natural regeneration from taking place.
That's the flamethrower he has in his hand.
That's right. This is slash burning, clearing up some of the unusable debris and preparing a site for planting. And here are our boys out planting some of our, what will be 117 million seedlings a year.
Sometimes have they got to go back and juvenile space them?
Absolutely. Well, yes, indeed. And sometimes we have to go back and replant too. It's not possible, of course, for every seedling you put in the ground to survive. It's an agricultural process that depends upon weather, on drought,
They're
on
thinning them out
frosting.
now, aren't they?
This is a juvenile spacing operation.
Well, about 5 or 6 years old.
I would guess they're something like that, Jack, perhaps a little older.
What's that?
This is loading fertilizer into a basket or a bin to be flown by a helicopter. After you've thinned a stand, if you apply a dose of fertilizer to it once every, say, 5, 10, or 15 years, depending upon the stand, you get tremendous increases in growth.
What a job trying to fertilize a forest.
It really is. Here you can see the pellets.
Yeah, nitrogen pellets.
I don't know what particular pellets these are. What you use depends upon the soil conditions and the forest you're growing.
Well, here we are in higher country now.
Yep, that looks like some of our interior country. And this is one of the areas where we can make some gains, Jack, is in fire protection and fighting. We in British Columbia have the best and most sophisticated fire protection agency for forest of anywhere in the world, but we can make some gains.
Which is the worst area for that, Peace River?
Well, the Peace River is so large that that's where most of our losses have been, and this is where most of our increases in firefighting capability are going to occur. But last year we had 4,000 different fires in BC. Cost us a lot of money, but we kept our losses down to them. Watch this guy go in and hit that little spot fire there.
Dangerous caper, that, isn't it?
Tremendous, tremendous flyers, those guys.
Yeah, I know a young fellow who flies a lead plane, you know, to show them where to drop it.
My ambition is to take a ride in one of those someday.
Well, you can have your ambition by yourself. Okay, thank you very much. Take away the film. Well, what's that?
That was the worm.
Oh, forget the one. You get a B+ for your commentary. Questions to Tom Waterland on the long-range plan. All of it. 10 pounds of it. Must weigh a good 5 or 6 pounds.
Well, Jack, I know it's at least 6 centimeters thick. We're metric now, you know.
You're metric, I'm not. After the break. I saw a piece in one of your technical reports that you'd suffered a lot of flooding in some of your seedling areas. I think of Vancouver Island, your nurseries.
Yes, that's right, Jack.
Somebody must have boo-booed when they planted that place there.
The growth of seedlings is subject to the same hazards that any agricultural operation has.
I suppose.
The frost heaves, flooding, you know,
Are you going to point to this and say it's going to create a lot of jobs every year from now on in a specific season?
Yeah, Jack, the forestry industry, as opposed to forest industry in British Columbia, will be a continually expanding industry. These basic and silvicultural programs, which we have laid out for the public here, will, by the 1985 end of this program period, will be employing an additional 3,500 or so people on forest management work in BC.
Nasty question. I suppose because of the potential fall down of merchantable, harvestable timber, that you'll be looking askance at increasing parks or wilderness parks, because we need the timber.
Jack, one basic concept in our new legislation is that we must manage our forest in consultation and cooperation with other resource managers. We have in this program made allowances for very substantial reductions in the forest land base over the next 20-year period. We recognize the other demands on the forest. People want more parks, more farms, more urban development, more highways, more hydro right-of-ways, all of these things, more fish and wildlife. We can't have them all and have more wood too. So we all have to make trade-offs. The trade-offs we're willing to make are not as much as perhaps the Fish and Wildlife Branch would want, but it's a compromise, and we're looking at something in the order of 25% reduction in land available for forestry over the next 20-year period.
For the purposes of parks?
No, parks is one part of it. We're not against parks. I love the outdoors. I love wilderness. But all these other demands that are being placed upon the same land base can't be met. We all have to
Fair enough.
understand.
Let's try the phone calls.
Okay.
Let's see if we can keep them to the point.
Very
And
good.
let's see if you'll go directly at the Minister with a question or an opinion about the long-range plan if you understand all or any part of it. Beginning with this call, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Say, I'd like to know if Mr. Waterman is aware.
Waterland.
Pardon?
Waterland.
Well, it's on the logging in the Coquitlam area. On the watersheds, they were given allotment to clear out the underbrush, and they've been logging for 12 years now.
Okay, good question. It's hardly relevant, but do you know about it, Mr. Waterland?
No, I'm not familiar with the particular case you talk about, sir. If you have a concern about it, why don't you give Al McPherson, our regional manager, a call? I'm sure he can help you.
Where's this call from? Salmon Arm. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm not the only one in this area that is concerned the way they're doing the logging now to what they used to. The way that the old horse logging and more or less take out the big timber and leave the small. And
You don't want to go back to horse logging, do you?
well, no, but the thing is, when they were doing it that way, you took off a lot of timber, and you could still have more come on right away.
Tom?
Well, selective logging is still done to a considerable extent, especially in that district you're in, which is part, I guess, of the Kamloops Forest region. Last year, in the Kamloops region, of the area harvested, over 50% was selectively logged. But, sir, if you continually take out the higher or the best looking trees and pull those out and leave the others there, you're going to degrade your forest because it's that smaller stuff that will be regenerating, and you won't have as good a forest as if you left the large ones in there to regenerate.
Good point. Fort St. James. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Waterland,
Good morning.
any long-range plans for cleaning up Lake Williston, all that wood, Lake Anomanica Bay, and all through there?
Yes, the responsibility for cleaning up Williston Lake, and I've flown over that lake myself 100 times. It's not a pleasant thing to see, but BC Hydro flooded it. They have the responsibility for cleaning it up. But we, as the Ministry of Forest, have been working with them over the last, well, ever since the lake was flooded, I guess. We have provided the expertise, they have provided the money, and it's a slow, long process. One thing I would like to see in the future, and something we're doing in the Revelstoke area, is clean up the area, harvest that good timber before the flooding begins. And it requires more forward planning.
Well, can you give us a guarantee that we won't have any more bot shops like Lake Williston, which I've seen too, and which was really a gruesome sight 5 or 6 years ago?
Yes, Jack. The Ministry of Forest has to have the lead time to plan the harvesting, and this we'll be insisting on from not only BC Hydro, but from the Highways Department, from everyone who has clearing for right-of-ways of any kind.
I hope you can sort out your trouble in federal jurisdiction about fisheries when your people go in and nail people, and the federal fisheries people are all upset about it, if I recall that kerfuffle rightly.
The nailing was not done by us, Jack.
The nailing was done by them.
Yes.
They,
Lake Williston,
Yes, sir?
carry on, sir, from Fort St. James.
on Lake Williston, there's lots of good timber yet. It's just dry, and yet they're burning it. Couldn't they find some way to use this dry timber? It's sound wood.
Yeah, we have used a lot of that wood. The longer it is there, of course, the less usable it is. We get checking and problems with it. It's always usable as a fuel source.
Okay, does it still look like a complete mess?
It sure does.
Are you a logger?
Yes, sir. I worked up there for the last 4 years. It's real disheartening to see all that stuff going to
What
waste.
were you working with Hydro, taking the underwater logging?
No, I worked for a private contractor logging up in the green strip.
We have to do a much better job of that type of thing in the future, and I'm sure that we will under this program. We just can't afford to waste wood. It shouldn't have been done then, but expediencies of the time, that power was needed. It would have taken another 10 years, I guess, to get that power on stream if they hadn't flooded it. So we have to have more lead time. We have to plan farther ahead now. Of course, Hydro has a problem. Every time they even hint of a power project somewhere, the whole world jumps up in arms, and they're a little reluctant to
I don't think
make it
people are
publicly
quite
known.
so reluctant now because of the choices between the emotional opposition to nuclear and hydro. People think, oh, maybe dams aren't that bad. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I'd like to know, I've been a logger and I've been a planter. I'd like to know why there is such a great length of time between the harvesting and the replanting of the forest.
All right, under the legislation we have now, We simply say that the forest must be regenerated, and it must be within a reasonable period of time. That period of time will depend upon the forest you are working with. We would like to see that within 3 years' time, the forest will be regenerated, and either naturally or by planting. We have to select our priorities, of course, so we should plant our better growing sites earlier, and perhaps allow some delay. If it must occur anywhere, we allow that delay on the poorer site. But
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
And Mr. Waterland. I'm a 24-year-old rigging slinger, and I've been in the bush since I was 18 years old. And I've been watching what's been going on around me, like with clear cut, close to rivers with washouts. I haven't been able to go to work because of washouts, because of the clear cut. And also, I'm looking into the future, and I think helicopter logging is the next way to go. You know, it's going that way, because I can't work right now because there's not enough winter shows left, eh? I have to be half mountain goat. I'm up the mountain, you know, right up at the top. You know, you thought it was tough in the old days. Well, you go up there now, see what it's like.
What do you do, actually?
I'm a rigging slinger.
A rigging slinger in a logging operation on the top of a mountain somewhere.
Yeah, well, I'm a glorified whistle punk, if you know what that is.
Yeah, I know what that is.
yes, you mentioned clear-cut logging,
Yes.
and you mentioned helicopter logging. Helicopter logging is a technique that is rapidly developing now. It's very expensive. I'm sure that as the years go by, we can do more logging with helicopters and the cyclocrane device that is being developed now. A lot of opportunities remain. However, we still have to rely upon the old systems until we do replace them. I don't think helicopter logging will ever replace all logging.
For 100 foot to punch roads in, where I have to log now, eh? To get the fallers up there, it costs $2,500 for 100 foot of, you know, with a drill rig in there punching roads, eh?
Yeah.
And, you know, in the long range, helicopters are going to be better off, and we're not going to scar the mountains as badly either.
I know that helicopters can be used to reach out
Logger,
beyond.
eh? Like, you know what's happening up in the Charlottes, eh? With QC timber?
No.
Very, very well aware of it. But let me
What's happening up in the Charlottes
let me
with
let me
QC timber?
let me
Everything
let
else,
me let me
right?
respond, sir.
I believe that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't clear-cut logging.
Okay, hold on, sir. What happened up in the Charlottes with QC timber?
We had some mudslides, Jack. We've had problems with soil stability there and many other places in the province as we learn the techniques to harvest in that type of area. But we cannot go to all helicopter logging. It would it's just physically and economically impossible. It can be used as a way of extending beyond our normal road development areas. It can be used to harvest timber which is otherwise inaccessible, which is close to a drop site such as salt water or a lake or on a land landing. But it's only a tool to extend logging. At the present time, economically, you cannot extend all your logging to helicopter logging.
What in this report improves your techniques for dealing with sloppy logging and washouts and interference with fisheries? Anything, or is that merely an ongoing intention?
That's an ongoing process, Jack. The legislation says we must cooperate with other resource users, and we have been, and we are. As a result of some of the things that happened up on the Charlottes, we have worked very closely with the industry, with the federal government, ourselves, in order to find out, you know, just what is the stability problem up there, what do we have to do with it. And as a result of that, we've classified the land into various levels of stability. And we're saying, no, you can't harvest on those less stable areas until we find out a way of doing
Look,
it.
a good call, 24-year-old. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Webster and Waterland after the break. Last thing I saw of Ernie Hall was it the NDP opposition spokesman was, somebody. Have you had any reaction from the opposition yet on the detail of this?
Well, Bill King, Jack, said that it'd take a while to assess the report before he responded.
What about the industry?
Well, the industry is doing the same thing. I presented it last week to a group covering a whole cross-section of the forestry sector. Their initial reaction was very, very favorable, and the opposition haven't responded yet. I don't blame them because it's a large bunch of technical information to digest, and I'd be very disappointed if they shot from the hip on it.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Is that me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, Mr. Minister and Mr. Webster, or Honorable Minister, Mr. Webster. I'm an old logger. I put about 40 years altogether in the woods, and I noticed the vast changes between the old-time logging, that is, during the time of the skidders, and all through the process of the cats and the helicopters. Now, I think the helicopters myself is a more efficient way of logging because most of the places that are using helicopters are handy to rivers and...
But let me ask you a question. Did you ever think you'd come to see the day when we're told that unless we change our techniques, we could lose 33% of our merchantable timber down the road a little bit?
Yes. Well, Mr. Webster, I often wonder why that they haven't forced the removal of all the big stumps on flat land, you know, that would make agricultural land.
Well, sir, in some cases...
you see, now...
Oh, no, we got your point. Let the minister answer that one. I wondered about that myself.
We would like to remove all these old snags, but, you know, when we attempt to do it, all of a sudden we get the Fish and Wildlife people after us saying, hey, don't hold it a minute, that's where our eagles nest or some other species of wild animal.
No, I don't really mean them, Mr. Minister, the snags. I mean the old stumps. Yeah. Some of them are up to 1,000 years old, and they are great, huge sizes. Now,
any material like that that's usable, we certainly, in increasing or tightening down on our utilization standards, we have to remove, and that's a part of the whole process here.
It's a very simple question from that chap, though. He's saying he's seen areas which have been logged over and left a bit unsightly. You could almost turn them into agricultural land. That wouldn't be part of your silviculture plan at all, would it?
Jack, as I said a little while ago, you can't have all the agricultural land you want and all the forest land you want. We want to maintain our forest land base in British Columbia. It's very important to us. And if we don't maintain it, this fall down will occur at some point in the future, no matter how well we manage the land.
How many million, what did you say, 25% of the timberland will be alienated for other purposes in the future?
I'm saying a reasonable projection is that we'll lose a quarter of our productive forest land base if we compromise as much as we have to with other ministries.
From Victoria, BC, go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Webster. I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Waterland.
Good morning.
My name is Sebastian D. Gatti. I'm from Victoria. I also sit on various, I sit on Sports Fishing Advisory Group, and I also am the Vice President of the BC Wildlife Federation.
Go ahead.
With that in mind, I liked Mr. Waterland's comment on February the 11th. He had a meeting with Minister Rogers in the Reynolds Sound area, and a discussion ensued that probable results from construction of the logging roads rather than the logging itself. Then Mr. Waterland made a statement, and I quote, Waterland said a major factor in the large number of deer roaming throughout the islands, eating the ground cover, which would provide the root system needed to stabilize the soil and to prevent it from slipping down hills. These areas that were logged and where the problem exists with the eggs and the tons of mud that was dumped into Riley Creek are the first line problem with that was the removal of the logs from stable areas. The second problem with that is that actually it resulted in, it is poor management because there were certain areas that were proved to have a natural piping effect where roads were brought in. Now, Mr. Waterland has stated that there is a necessity now to prepare various zone maps showing stability.
Yeah, what is your point? I mean, we realize there may be a difficulty in Reynolds Sound, if that's what you call it, but what's your point?
My basic contention with Mr. Waterland is that the Forest Service should certainly develop an idea of integrated resource management with the other bureaus involved.
Well, I'm more interested in the remark you said, in which I can say to Tom Waterland quite bluntly and probably totally inaccurately, do deer damage forests or regeneration of forests?
Jack, let me just correct Sebastian here slightly. I didn't say that deer were a major part of the problem, but they are a part of the problem. I'm not saying we should get rid of the deer either, but the Fish and Wildlife people who accompanied us that day, their biologists and our pedologists, said, look, there is problems with soil stability. We attempted to plant those hillsides with fast-growing stock so that it would stabilize, the root systems do stabilize the area. The deer come along and eat the trees, and so they don't develop a root system. It is a part of the problem. It's not a major part of the problem, but all these little pieces put together give us what we have. And yes, one of the problems, the most severe problem in logging in areas like that is road construction. And we have to develop different techniques, which is what we're doing, so that they don't have this effect of aggravating the slope stability. And that area was caused by a natural piping effect in which inadvertently some of the runoff water from the road was channeled into it. All these things lead us to better pre-planning of such logging areas so that we don't make the same mistake twice.
Have you read the summary of this thing yet, Sebastian?
I've gone through pieces of it. When I originally got my hands on it, it was basically in a piecemeal system.
Well, it looks good if their intentions are right, which they probably are, and it's all carried out. It depends what the proof of the pudding will be in the future logging, won't it?
Sebastian, your last remark interested me somewhat. You say you got it when it was in a piecemeal system. This has been developed by the
I have been in communication with some of the people. I mean, as far back as last May at the BC Wildlife Federation.
Oh, fair enough. We don't need the history. Much obliged, Sebastian. After the break. With Tom Waterland, the Minister of Forest, I haven't even touched the couple of 100,000 beef cattle that roam around the rangelands in BC. Does this report also covers that future, doesn't it, of rangeland?
Indeed it does, Jack. It covers the management of Crown Range and recreation on Crown Forest land. Our beef industry in British Columbia is very important to many parts of our province, very important to the ranchers, of course. We can make substantial gains in forage available to the private rancher by doing what we're doing, which is almost doubling our budget for range management. We can increase the range in the Prince George and Peace River country, and we can enhance it in other parts by better protecting it and managing it.
You mean replanting rangeland?
Well, a lot of rangeland has problems with infestations of weed.
How many trees are diseased in these? Well, of all our massive forests, we've got a lot of disease in the old trees, haven't we?
Yeah. We lose each year the equivalent of about 1/4 of our annual cut to insects and disease.
But you don't dare put anything on it. You've got to back down and leave it to nature every time, haven't you?
No, we don't, Jack. We have to maintain all the management tools we have at our disposal. This problem in the Kootenays with mountain pine beetle, there's no effective control measure at the present time other than harvesting and getting the trees out. But there's a lot of research taking place. In my trips to the Scandinavian countries last fall, they're doing some very interesting things parallel to what we're doing. The whole world forest sector is working together to try to overcome that problem.
Okay, couple more calls. Victoria, Victoria again, different call, I hope. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Waterland,
Good morning.
you've been responsible for forests in this province since 1975. That's 5 years. Now, everyone knew at that time the state of the forest in this province, and you were elected on the heels of the Pierce report. Why has it taken you this long to move?
Yeah, good question.
Another example of social credit incompetence, or what?
Well, sir, I said when we started this program that forest management in British Columbia is not a political thing. We got this report in 1976, the fall. We got the Pierce Royal Commission report, a very monstrous and technical document. We analyzed that completely with our Forest Policy Advisory Committee. We developed legislation from it, which is acknowledged as being the best resource legislation in the world. We have, from that, required this type of analysis of the resource, and I think we've moved very, very quickly.
5 years?
We've moved extremely quickly. The only thing, my friend, if you want to become political, the only thing that your former government did was...
I just can't understand why it's
the only
taken you
thing
5
your
years.
former government did was to commission a royal commissioner to look at it. And we have carried on from then, taken that report,
You had a report,
and come
a
forth
previous
with the
report.
best legislation, the best program, the only 5-year program of anywhere I know of, any forest in the world. Thank you.
But you will give the NDP credit for giving Pierce the job to do the Royal Commission.
That's right. NDP commissioned Pierce as a royal commissioner, one of a number that have taken place over the years. I'm the only forest minister that has ever taken a Royal Commission report or any other report and developed this type of comprehensive, forward-looking legislation and program and have provided the funding for it.
You're a wee bit early patting yourself on the back, though, until we get some detailed comment from the industry and from the opposition.
I'm sure, Jack, that everybody interested in the industry is going to know that this is not political stuff. I
Yes,
don't like
caller.
to get political.
Go ahead, caller.
Mr. Webster, wouldn't you agree that 5 years has been a long time to take steps to improve the forest conditions of this province?
No, I can't say that.
Sir, we
honestly.
have 47.5 million hectares of good forest land in the province. I don't know if you realize just how much forest that is. We have one of the
Not
most...
if you use hectares.
We have one of the most complicated forests in the world. It ranges from our coastal rainforest, Jack, to our deserts in the interior from 49 degrees latitude to 60. It has the most complicated mix of species of trees, of management problems. 5 years to develop a program like that? Goodness gracious, that's outstanding.
Wait just a minute, question from Webster. Is it correct that how many acres in a hectare?
About 2.47.
Well, why couldn't you have said 50 million times what? 2.5?
147 million acres.
150 million acres.
Jack,
At any rate, I think
we are going metric. I have a friend up in the Caribou who said, you know, I used to live 10 miles from town, now we've gone metric. I live twice as far. It's a matter of adjusting to it.
We'll never get used to it. You made a good point, old boy, but I don't think you can knock him for this one because, you know, how many years did we go through the other oil commissions? Tree farm licenses, forest management licenses. What will they be called in future?
We have 3 or 4 basic licensing systems, Jack.
Don't tell me about them.
No.
Last call. Go ahead, please.
2 points for Mr. Waterland.
Can't hear you, ma'am. You've lost your voice this morning.
The first is that burning off the underbrush is the worst thing you can do. You leave the forest floor and the seedlings at the mercy of the winds.
I don't agree with you at all, ma'am.
You don't agree at all?
No, not at all. Clearing of underbrush not only enhances the forest, but it also enhances wildlife habitat
You have
as
had
well.
the preliminary canter from Tom Waterland, Minister of Forests, on this massive study to match the legislation to protect our income from lumber and other resources allied with lumber in the future, correct?
All the resources that are on our forest land base, Jack, will be well managed.
Well, I hope you and I live long enough to see it work.
I will, Jack. I don't know about you.
I wouldn't count now if I were you. Not the way things are going for your government of Victoria. You might live long enough, but you might not be there. My thanks to Tom Waterland, Minister of Forest. Webster after the break. I just skip read it during the commercial break just now. Anything you want to know about forestry, just ask me and I'll give you the instant question off the top of my head forthwith. It's difficult to judge it. It looks sane, intelligent, reasonable, proper. I'd like to hear what Bill King says about it later on and what the industry says about it later on. But it is a fact of life. You know, I've had old Gordon Gibson and all the rest of them talking about the vast acres of uncut timber in British Columbia. And you wondered how long it could go on, and there still are inaccessible areas. I hope it's a non-partisan issue, I'm not sure at all. Anyway, something which is an American issue walked into my studio the other day. You've had me hammer people across the country on pipelines. The old land pipeline is gone from Alaska to here. That's the one that Clark dithered about and Trudeau dithered about. The Trans Mountain link through Canada from Port Angeles is gone. Northern Tier Pipeline have got the contract, they say, and here's my interview with one of their VPs last week. One of the great phobias on the west coast of Canada and the United States is the almost for certain prospect of massive spills from super tankers coming down the west coast, especially those threading their way through the very tricky Straits of Juan de Fuca. Well, you know how the Canadian government stands on it. And if you do, you're a better man than I am, Gunga Din. Clark, who used to be the Prime Minister, he dithered and messed around with pipeline propositions and was apparently in favor of the all-land route from Alaska through British Columbia to the United States, talking about American oil. And then Trudeau, when he was on my program, not so many weeks ago, came out flat-footed, despite the fact that he had dithered too for the foothills all-land route for oil from Alaska to the United States. With me now is a guy from a company we had better get to know. Northern Tier Pipeline Company of the United States. And the man's name is Jim Hodge. He is a vice president of Northern Tier. Can you sit back, Mr. Hodge, and gloat a little bit that all the hopes and expressed wishes of Canadian Prime Ministers past and present don't matter, and that you people in Northern Tier, with Carter's authority and approval, are going to bring the massive supertankers down from Alaska through the Straits of Juan de Fuca for your all-American pipeline to the east?
Well, Jack, I can't gloat about that. What I can do is say that, yes, we do have that authority under Title V of the U.S. 1978 National Energy Authority, that Northern Tier will probably be an existing energy facility in the United States, and in this case it will be an all-American facility. I think it will increase tanker traffic in the Strait, not in Puget Sound. But I really have to take some exception to the...
Take all the umbrage you want.
The catastrophic kind of spill. And we just don't think, and we've done an incredible amount of work, something like $4 million worth of environmental oil spill work on this issue. And having additional traffic, crude oil traffic on the Strait, does not provide nearly the jeopardy that exists with existing crude oil traffic in the inner Puget Sound. The Strait is a large body of water. It's capable with proper vessel traffic controls.
Oh, Mr. Hodge, we're not worried about Puget Sound. We're worried about the Gulf Islands. We're worried about the west coast of Vancouver Island. We're worrying about how far out to sea your big tankers will be as they bring the oil down to your oil port right in the middle of the Straits of Juan de Fuca, a tricky place near Port Angeles.
Well, it's not a tricky place. I think there's two questions here, and the first question is one that you brought up, is the question of tanker traffic on the west coast of Canada. Now, that traffic coming out of Alaska is going to exist.
It's there now.
It's there now. And
in smaller ships.
In Jones Act tankers, which are limited to about 100, I think the largest one's about 188,000 deadweight tons now. That's an issue that we really are going to have no effect on. The issue that we will increase traffic on is the traffic within the Strait. Now, the Strait is not a tricky body of water. There are some ports that are difficult. The San Juan Islands are probably a difficult navigational piece of water, but the Strait really isn't, and it is subject, because of its contours and everything, to some very stringent, controlled vessel traffic.
Let's take it in two parts. If you were a czar and you were going to use your common sense and were not financially involved in Northern Tier pipelines, or no political considerations of having an all-American route from Alaska, the sane and common sense thing to have done, if there were no political interference of any kind, would be to run an all-land oil pipeline from Alaska through Canada to your United States, wouldn't it?
I think in years gone by that very well may have been the best alternative, but that's not the world that we have it today. The Alyeska pipeline exists.
Now, why did Carter go the all-American route? West Coast, Port Angeles, pipeline across to Washington State and through. Why? What were the principal considerations that took him that way? Security of the line? Not wanting it built in a foreign country?
No, I don't think that was a big play, Jack. I really don't. I think there are three reasons. One is kind of political economic, that there are substantial benefits from having all the steel produced in the United States, and this will be the largest order of steel ever placed, having U.S. laborers build U.S. energy facilities. The other two reasons are kind of pragmatic reasons. First of all, our line services a whole vast area of the United States that none of the competitors would have served. That's the Northern Tier region, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Colorado, Utah. We can serve that area. The other question is flexibility. And Carter mentioned this in his decision. He said that we should build this line because it provides us a vessel for California crude, the overthrust basin around Montana and Wyoming, the Williston Basin over North Dakota. So this provides the U.S. now with the greatest degree of transportation flexibility. So those three reasons are the kind of...
I suppose we were looking for something for nothing in Canada, and even at this moment, does the Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline have any way of putting the arm on you or on the U.S. government when you bring your oil to Port Angeles, put it there somewhere? Is there any way that any of your oil will come up through Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline before it goes back into the States?
No.
They're out in the cold.
They're out in the cold as it stands now, with one exception, that they would provide, if there is traffic moving north of the Northern Tier system to the refineries that exist in Puget Sound, or perhaps even further north, coming this far north, they could provide that function. I think they've indicated a willingness, if Northern Tier is built, if those activities take place, they would like to participate.
You might use a little bit of the pipeline of Trans Mountain to feed your Washington State northern 4 refineries.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, when you land your oil at Port Angeles, will it go by under water pipeline to where, to come out on the American mainland?
Camino Island, which is just across Whidbey Island to Camino Island. That's where it will be.
And then it will
on the
go
mainland.
across the top of the country. How far will it go, the Northern Tier Pipeline? The All-American route. Where will it end?
Just in Clearbrook, Minnesota, about 1,500 miles.
Next, I want to know from you, Jim Hodge, Vice President of Northern Tier Pipeline, the winners, and Trudeau and Clark can kiss goodbye to their plans. Eh?
We were the winner under that competition, yes.
They can kiss goodbye to their plans, did you say yes?
Yes,
They're out in the cold.
I think so, yeah.
Any chance of a Canadian pipeline down through land is finished?
As far as the U.S. regulatory process goes,
It's concerned.
It's concerned.
But I have a few more questions for Jim Hodge after the break. Jim Hodge, Vice President, Northern Tier Pipeline Company. Have, in fact, you got all the approvals you need to go ahead yet, or are you not still being held up by Washington State and other states on the actual location of your pipeline, of your oil refinery site, its operation, and the route?
We're in the permitting process in 2 states still. We're not being held up by them. We're just, it's a long, involved
Just
process.
bureaucracy.
The Washington State, the Energy Facility Site and Evaluation Council, and in the state of Montana. Montana permit will have that within a month or a month and a half, and we feel very positive about it.
How big is your holding facility for oil going to be at your Port Angeles? What do you call that? Oil port.
Oil port. 6 million barrels.
How much will that cost to build?
Just the tank farm or the entire
The
facility?
tank farm.
I think the tank farm is 50 or 60 million dollars.
What will the whole deal cost to complete?
Capital requirement about $1.6 billion.
The biggest project of its kind in American history? Pipelines?
Well, no, I don't think so. No, there are a couple of larger pipelines in the U.S. that may have cost some more product lines.
Last thing I read about was that your financing was not by any means assured. Is that a bit of a slander on you?
No, I don't think so. We have an odd sort of complexion. We have big companies involved in our group.
Exxon, of course.
No, not Exxon, U.S. Steel, and
Big enough.
Burlington Northern, Westinghouse, Western Crude, Cenex, a group of agricultural co-ops.
But it's not the big oil companies.
Not the big oil companies. I think the complexion of our group is a particularly interesting one, given today's feeling toward divestiture and those kind of questions. We'll obviously have to have some relationship, contractual relationships and second and third tier equity relationships with major oil companies. But as it stands now, there are no major oil companies participating in Northern Tier.
Now, another question I've seen raised about, you are only a common carrier, therefore.
Just like a railroad, yes.
In other words, you merely build the pipeline and carry the oil, and make your profits on your rates for the carriage of the oil.
Exactly.
Under regulation. What is the assured supply from Alaska? If you're putting in $1.6 billion and God knows what else, how long is the oil going to last? It's not that lengthy a lifetime ahead, is it?
Well, the people that will put together the financial structure of Northern Tier will do that on a guaranteed basis, and it will be their determination of the supplies and the reserves. Our financing will be based on 20 years. We think the supplies will last a good deal longer than that, but just like buying a home, we're basing our economic structure on a 20-year structure. And that money would have to be guaranteed before the Northern Tier project could go ahead. So really the question of financeability is fairly moot. If Northern Tier is not built with enough funds to guarantee it for its 20-year existence, it won't be built.
And what I was really getting at was the supply of oil from the North Slope and from Alaska. It's not, it's finite too, that particular supply of oil. Or do you plan to use the pipeline to bring in other crude oil from other parts of the world to cross the Northern Tier?
Oh, definitely. The proposed action of Northern Tier is to, being a common carrier, we can't control it, but we estimate that about 65% of the traffic going through the Northern Tier system will be U.S. domestic crude, Alaskan crude or other U.S. domestic crudes, and probably 35% world crude, Persian Gulf, Indonesia, or any other area that's crude surplus.
It's not Alaska alone.
It's not Alaska alone.
How can you bring Persian Gulf crude around here? Isn't that the long way around?
It's the short way. Most of the Persian Gulf crude that's coming into the United States is coming through the Gulf ports in the southern part of the United States. Port Angeles is 1,700 miles closer to the Persian Gulf than those ports are.
Now, what about your troubles in Washington State? Do you face the same kind of ecological, lobby that almost any industrial development faces up here? Can they exert enough pressure on Washington State to make life very difficult for you because of the fear of a blowout in your line or an oil spill in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, for which you would, of course, bear part of the blame?
Yes, you know, they can, will, and have. I think that's part of the process, and we have some opponents in the state of Washington. We're in a contested case hearing there. It's a quasi-judicial process. There are 23 interveners in that process, some proponents as well as opponents, but it's an adversary process. But I think if you're talking about a $1.6 billion energy project today, in 1980, you'd better have an adversary relationship. In other words, through that process, you really make a much better project. And I think that we have had a credible number of examples of that. We've changed, in the siting process, both federally and at the state level, we've changed over 70% of our route.
You mean you were wrong the first time around with 70% of your route?
I think that's so.
And the ecological lobby people have forced you to change it?
We were either wrong or there were better
alternatives. I didn't realize you were a bunch of hams. That's not fair, but we're losing sight of the real problem. First of all, you don't care what we think up here about your Northern Tier operation, do you? Economic jealousy will raise its ugly head at once, and Trudeau and Clark might go into little pouts and make nasty phone calls to Carter. But I mean, what the hell do you care in Northern Tier pipeline about what we think about it?
We care because the Northern Tier pipeline system, both the oil transshipment port and the project, is going to be in existence for an awful long time. We are going to be built, it's going to go ahead, we're going to have to live in those waters and in that part of the country for an awful long time, so we do care. We care, even looking through the permitting process, we care on an operational basis. Because if something happens where we're unable to get along with you folks 5 years from now, it will certainly be as difficult as it is now.
There's only one thing that can happen that will make us hate you absolutely and totally without reservation. You know what that is, don't you?
What's that?
Your pipeline bursts underneath the sea or something, and you foul up the San Juans and the Gulf Islands.
I could see where you would if that happened. And we think that we, through the various studies we've done, can provide a definition as to what that risk is going to be. And we think, and I think that the siting councils, both at the federal level and in the state of Washington, will make a determination that that is an acceptable risk.
Oh, a question. You mentioned Jones Act carriers, presently oil tankers. Now that means, Jones Act means American bottoms between American ports, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When you go to when they go to supertankers to feed your pipeline, will the Jones Act apply? Or will it be Pan American and Liberian and God knows what not, single skin, giant supertankers, not under the Jones Act?
All of the Alaskan traffic will be under the Jones Act. The other, the 35% or whatever the eventual percentage.
They could be any old.
They could be anyone, but the size of our port is really going to dictate large crude oil tankers. And if you get into those large crude oil tankers, they're really technologically probably further ahead than the Jones Act tankers.
Single skin?
Some of them may be. Some of them may be.
How big?
The Jones Act tankers, by the way, are single skin.
But at least they're under the American ownership.
They're under American
and have
ownership.
seamanship standards in which we can have some faith, presumably.
Well, I think the controls are relatively strict.
What will be the average size of tanker unloading at Port Angeles? Is that the name of your oil port, by the way?
Port Angeles, yes.
So you're going to call it?
Well, it's the oil port, the northern tier transshipment port.
What size?
The
Of the
average
supertankers?
size, and I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's somewhat over 100,000 deadweight ton tanker will be the average size that we'll call.
You don't know the barrels?
The barrels are about a little under 900,000 barrels.
Not that big, if you say it quickly. Anyway, you sit here and raise your hand and solemnly promise and verily declare that never will there be an oil spill as long as it's in the hands of Northern Tier.
Can't do that.
Well,
I can
yes.
come as close to defining that as you can in today's technology.
When do you start?
I think we'll have most of the paperwork done probably by the end of 1980. So we're looking at the 1981 construction period.
Congratulations. You've got the 1.6 billion, you've got the 6,500 jobs, we got the gas pipeline.
I hope you will.
Thank you, Jim Hodge.
Thank you.
No telephone calls to speak of, just on the forestry this morning. Got to do more free-for-alls.
Right.
Right.
Okay, tomorrow we have Bill Jackson, who is the president of the Provincial Government Union Employees of Canada.
Well, that's a new body, NUPE.
yes.
NUPE, the new massive labor monster.
That's right.
Which is going to control all the crossing, what do you call them, guards?
No, I don't know
Out in
about that.
Delta? Yes. Put them all in unions. Great.